Well, hello again. This is Aaron Merritt. I want to share with you this fourth lesson in the Bible Survey course called the Books of History. Now, these are the books of the Old Testament, from the book of Joshua to the book of Nehemiah that we're going to look at. And we'll take a look at each of the books, give a brief outline, and talk about the book just a little bit. And again, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below. Welcome to hear from you. Now, the authorship of these books, unlike the first five that we looked at in the last lesson, actually there's various authors instead of just one. These include Joshua and Samuel, Nathan, Gad, Jeremiah, Ezra, and Nehemiah. The time and period and place of writing takes place from the conquest, about 1400 BC, to the return of the exiles in about 500 BC. And those dates are, of course, approximate. Let's talk about Joshua. The first book in the list of historical books is the book of Joshua. It is most likely written during the events described, with a short appendix marking Joshua's death by a second hand, a hand other than Joshua. The purpose of the book is to describe the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham and Israel. It is a necessary book, bridging the time of the Exodus to the time of the Judges. You might notice as you read through Joshua, it reads like Deuteronomy. It is a book that is precise. It is a book that cares about detail. There's a significant section of Joshua involved in just dividing the land. So let's go and take a look at this, look at the book. You might be surprised to learn that the first 12 chapters of Joshua are the only chapters involved with the war, the war to conquer. Joshua takes a divide and conquer approach when it comes to Canaan. He drives through Jericho, splits the territory, and works south, works north, and eventually brings all of Canaan to heel. And then once Canaan is conquered, it is now divided. He goes about setting up landmarks and territories for the 12 tribes, or the 10 and a half tribes, 9.5 tribes. There's 2.5 that stayed across the Jordan here in chapters 13 and 22. And then chapter 23 to 24 is Joshua's final address. This is where the "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord" speech comes from. And it last is his burial in Canaan. And there's 3 burials in Joshua. There's Joshua's burial, there's Joseph's burial, and there's one more. I can't think of it. But there's the death, or you see Joseph come back as a character, as a corpse anyway, and the promise that he would be buried in the land when they go back to Egypt is finally fulfilled there at the end of Joshua. Phinehas, I think the high priest, Phinehas the high priest dies. So you've got these 3 burials there at the end of Joshua that tell us, now we finally come home. So what happens after Joshua? Well, that's where Judges comes in. In the days of the early monarchy, and this is most likely the hand of Samuel that does this, who compiles the book of Judges from written records. But this is before David conquers Jabez. So what Judges and Ruth end up being, these next 2 books, is kind of a defense written by Samuel, justifying why David is the rightful king. David is identified by name at the end of Ruth, but not as king. So by this chronology, Judges' composition lies a considerable time after the composition of Joshua, and as much as perhaps 200 years. And this may account for some of the repetitive material that you see in Judges from Joshua. The purpose of Judges is to defend the wisdom of calling up a king, as evidenced by a couple of the passages, 17:6, 18:1, 19:1, 21:25. All of them point to the depravity resulting from having no king, a kingless, leaderless Israel, and one who consistently fails to recognize God as its king and to learn from its mistakes tells the reader that a king may be a good idea. Perhaps this Judges is an apology for kingship. As such, it bridges the gap from Joshua to Saul. What is interesting is this experiment that takes place between the time of Joshua and Samuel, where no clear leader exists for the first time in Israel's history. How would Israel function with only the law and its priesthood to adjudicate them, governed by God's word alone? Paul's conclusion here seems apt in 1 Corinthians 15:56. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. This great experiment of calling up men and even women from time to time to fight Israel's battles. Well, we see the overall outline for the two books here. We're calling Joshua, chapters 1 through 3, delivering Israel. This is the times of the Judges, as the book is named, from chapter 3 to chapter 16. And then it's just this series of stories that just show the depravity of Israel in chapter 17 to 21, to the end of the book. And it's this bright, shining light that's Ruth, the 4 chapters of Ruth, that show us how God, even through all of this, preserves the line of his Son, the Messiah. Judges and Ruth, Judges particularly, is a sad, dark chapter of Israel's history, but one that's necessary for us to see and get us from point A to point B. These are the books of Samuel and the books of Kings. These were likely compiled near the end of David's reign from documents composed by Samuel, Nathan, and Gad, who's included in 1 Chronicles 29:29. We see the events of Samuel, of his life. And you might note here in the Hebrew Bible, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings are known as the former prophets. The book of Kings are traditionally ascribed to Jeremiah, who used sources like the Annals of Solomon or the Annals of the Kings of Judah, referenced in 1 Kings 14:29, and even the Annals of the Kings of Israel, 1 Kings 14:19. Another note, textual dependence here between Isaiah 36 through 39 and 2 Kings 18:13 to 20:19, and then there's dependence between Jeremiah 52 and 2 Kings 24:18 to 25:21. May indicate that there are common sources between the two, or even a common authorship. The books together span over 500 years. The books serve to describe the history of the monarchy in Israel and in Judah, both the times of faithfulness and times of faithlessness. Israel became a major power when the old superpowers of Egypt and Babylon faded. They blossomed, especially under Solomon, to fill the vacuum, along with Syria and Philistia. As you see the outline, the story of Samuel, we see in 1 Samuel 1 through 7, he is called the last judge, or the last judge of Israel. The story of Saul, the first king of Israel, 1 Samuel 8 to 15. And the story of David picks up before the story of David is over, 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 1:37. And the story of the third king, Solomon, is actually a lot briefer, 1 Kings 1:38 to chapter 11. The divided kingdom emerges from 1 Kings 12 to 2 Kings 17 till the time of Israel sent into exile by Assyria. And then the kings of Judah on their own from 2 Kings 18 to 2 Kings 25. I include just a couple of historical notes. Here is a picture of the Moabite stone. This is hard evidence that David and the sons that succeeded him were real people. This alludes to 2 Kings 3, but the Moabites describe how they conquered the people of Israel and the house of David, as it is described. Another piece, this is a relief of King Jehu. King Jehu is bowing here before Shalmaneser III of Assyria. Before Israel, northern Israel, was taken into exile, Assyria were their slave masters or taskmasters. So here is an actual, if you had to take a Polaroid, here's an actual depiction, or as it were, of King Jehu. Notice that his headgear is a little bit different from the headgear of the Assyrians. His royal dress is a little bit different from the others. So it's interesting to just kind of include some of these things as we're going through here. It takes us to the book of Chronicles. The style and content of Chronicles places its final draft sometime in the mid-4th century BC. It was likely compiled from several sources, either by Ezra or someone schooled by him. It properly belongs with Ezra and Nehemiah, and some have argued that the Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah form a single unit. The purpose of the Chronicles serve as a reminder to the Jews who returned from exile in Babylon that God keeps his promises and that they are his chosen people. Chronicles does not include the succession of Israel's kings, but includes details not found in Samuel or Kings. For example, David's sin with Bathsheba is not included, but his call for a census and the judgment of God thereof are included. So Chronicles curiously opens up with this genealogical section, the first 9 chapters, that goes all the way from Adam in Genesis, one of those rare mentions of him, through the kingships of Saul and David. Then we talk about the United Kingdom, 1 Chronicles 10 to 2 Chronicles 9, that's through the end of Solomon's reign. And then the kingdom of Judah, from 2 Chronicles 10 to 36:8. And then this little curious section kind of tacked on to the end when the king of Persia decides to send the people back. And that's what really sets the stage for Ezra and Nehemiah. Both of these books were composed at about the same time, since they have always been together. The Hebrew Bible, in fact, lists them as a single book. This places the books at about 450 BC. The books describe the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel to see them back to the land, to rebuild the temple, the city, and its walls. So here, as the outline says, the first 6 chapters of Ezra is talking about rebuilding the temple. The 7th through the 10th chapters talks about restoring the law. Nehemiah wants to restore the wall, from Nehemiah 1 through 7. And at last the covenant is renewed with the people, from Nehemiah 8 to 13. Now the last book of the books of history is the book of Esther. It's a little bit different. Of all the books in this section, Esther is the most problematic. Nowhere, unique among the Old Testament books, is the name of God mentioned. Her presence in the canon has always been debated, though her replete presence in the Septuagint is telling. Some have argued for composition in the Hasmonean period, about 200 BC, but a better date lies closer to the events as they occurred during the exile, somewhere around 525 BC. Some argue the book is a fiction and have said that the story appears as simply an excuse to feast. Others, seeing the book as history, see the Esther story as true, thus serving to give credence to the celebration. The book illustrates God's presence in harsh circumstances, even when the characters are flawed. The feast in question, you might ask, is the Feast of Purim, and is the feast that celebrates the events of Esther. Esther is written in such a way, not only does it not include the name of God, but the book reads rather much like a drama. Nevertheless, the characters, the Persian king, for example, Xerxes, is an authentic historical character, and what we read in Esther, it wouldn't be outside his what he'd been known to do. The book of Esther, of course, a very simple outline: beauty pageant, from chapters 1 and chapter 2. Mordecai's pride kind of gets him on the bad side of Haman, chapters 2 and 3. Haman's cruel plot and the result. Haman despised the Jews because of Mordecai, chapters 3 through chapter 9. And then the Jews rejoice in chapters 9 and 10. So this is a unique book, interesting read. If you get a chance to read it, please do. It's a good book to read. But that concludes the section of history. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Thank you very much.